So, 2025 seems to be the year of My Hero Academia. We had the Vigilantes anime that is about to wrap up its first season. They released the final data fan book for My Hero Academia. Its final season is almost approaching. We've had a whole bunch of Horikoshi's art come out and major reveals about the story itself. But the most relevant part is that we're going to have not one, but two death battles starring My Hero Academia characters in the year of 2025. And that is what this video is going to be about. So let's talk about who will win this death battle between Miles Morales Spider-Man and Izuku Midoriya Deku. And spoilers, it may or may not be a wash. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Andrew, and I'm here to discuss whether or not the most recent death battle that is coming up, Deku versus Spider-Man, is going to be a fair fight or it's going to be a complete stomp. And from the research that I've done, this is going to be a very fun and interesting fight that is going to ruffle the feathers of not just My Hero Academia fans, but also fans of Spider-Man as well. And before we go more into whether or not Deku is going to completely stomp Miles or Miles is going to eviscerate Deku, I'm gonna ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that like button and notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more videos like this. Once Vigilantes begins its final episode, I'm gonna try to release more general My Hero Academia content before the final season comes out. So if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe. And with that, let's get right into the discussion. And to start off, let's talk about why these characters are each other's perfect matchup for death battle. For starters, they both have a connection to the OG Spider-Man in a few different ways. Miles Morales' connection derives from his more direct connection with Spider-Man, due to the fact that Spider-Man Miles Morales only exists because OG Peter Parker Spider-Man existed, as well as the story of Miles Morales coming from the universe of 1610, where he takes on the mantle of Spider-Man after feeling guilt by not being there to help save Spider-Man, even though at the moment he had spider powers. And even more of a connection is built upon Miles when you realize that he also now has the mentor of Peter Parker in the 616 universe that he now resides in. And how he's not just a legacy character for Spider-Man, but that he is Spider-Man in name as well. And tying into that, Deku also has a strong connection with Spider-Man as well. While indirect, it is still a strong connection through Horikoshi, because many people know that Horikoshi is a massive fan of Spider-Man, as well as just Marvel and comic book superheroes in general. As you can see, not just through his work, but also through a lot of the art that he's made, which he's made art of Deku along with All Might with Spider-Man, and has made multiple references to Deku just having Spider-Man's powers in the series proper. And not only that, you could say that he has a little bit of the mannerisms or the character descriptions of Peter, both being very nerdy, but also having extraordinary strength, as well as having the ability to sense when danger is coming in, as well as having a type of way to swing around the city. Very much showing how Deku is very much inspired by Spider-Man in his conception, thanks to Horikoshi's love of superheroes. But outside of their connections with Spider-Man, they also have connections between each other, which is that the core connections between Miles Morales and Deku is that they both are the successors to great heroes that start out as brilliant but unassuming young men, but after a series of events, both through their sheer chance, would end up in a position of great power. In Miles Morales' case, being bitten by a radioactive spider, while Deku receives one for all from All Might by eating a strand of his hair. Also in relation to this, both of their previous successors have had their Pyrrhic victories, All Might losing his quirk in a battle against All For One, while Peter died from the fatal wound in a truck explosion after his fight with Norman Osborn, specifically the 1610 version of Peter Parker. And while they both have a keen intellect that puts them above their peers in intelligence, they both in a way are carrying on a legacy that is core to who they are. They are also both known for holding back, as Deku regulates his power using percentages, while Miles, as being Spider-Man, is also known to hold his punches. And on a very funny note, each character has at least one loss on their belt in a death battle against a contemporary in their medium with Static in relationship to Miles Morales in comic form and Asta from Black Clover when it comes to manga. And that is more or less the surface level comparisons and connections that these characters have that make them very much the perfect death battle combatants for each other. And with their similarities discussed, let's talk about who would most likely win in this death battle by going over some stats and feats, skills, weapons, and other miscellaneous things, because when you start discussing what they have in their bag, you realize it's not as cut as dry as you would think, but also one side may be overwhelming the other in a particular category. But I want to go over a few ground rules. For the most part, how I'm going to be discussing these characters is going to be very similar to how Death Battle, does Death Battle. But for this video specifically, I will have 3 major ground rules. 1, most of the information on Spider-Man and his feats will most likely come from the TV shows and movies than the comics, due to the fact that those are the mediums that I know the most, especially when it involves Miles Morales, who I have very limited information on in comparison to Deku when it comes to what I'm going to be discussing in this video, and when it comes to who I think is going to win in the death battle. But besides that, most of the information that I will be getting from Miles Morales will be coming from the Versus Battle wiki and my own personal knowledge of the character. And going over ground rule 2, both characters will have access to their most used and most common equipment and powers. This will mean that Miles Morales will be using his normal suit and traditional equipment like web shooters and not external robotic suits, while Deku will be limited to retaining One for All alongside all of the quirks inside of it, as well as having access to his hero costume, including his reinforced boots and his mid-gauntlets with the compression technology. His new suit will most likely not factor into my discussion because he will be using One for All and the suit works effectively if you are quirkless, but we also do not know the full extent of the suit due to the fact that he gets the suit at the end of My Hero Academia and the additional chapters released. And finally, the version of Miles that I will be focusing on the most will actually be the comic version from the 616, originally from 610. Because yes, while I do know a lot of information about Miles Morales from the TV shows and whatnot, that Miles is completely outclassed by Deku, while comic Miles is a little bit more on his level. This would mean that most of the information that I will be discussing about Miles Morales will be coming from the 616 version, and I'll be using supporting material most likely from the 616 version, but this will not exclude information that we get from his original universe of 1610. And with that out the way, let's get into the stats. And as from here, I'll be going over each stat separately, but I'll be going over the stats for each character at the same time. Basically, if I'm going to be talking about attack potency, I'm going to compare both Deku as well as Miles at the same time. And the reason why I'll be going over these stats is so that we can have a better understanding of their strengths and weaknesses in their stats. Also, spoils for the My Hero Academia manga, because some of these stats are going to be based off the final chapters that haven't been animated yet. And to start off, let's talk about attack potency. And this is where Deku pretty much gets the win in this area, because Deku, from what I've seen, seems to have a higher attack potency that doesn't vary in comparison to Miles, and that Deku typically scales to be multi-city block level up to multi-continental level, which is consistent with his fight against Tomura Shigaraki in the final battle and his ability to clear the sky, assumingly all over Japan as well as towards America. While Miles, on the other hand, is best comparable to Peter Parker from his own universe, as well as Peter from 616, who is shown to have large building destructive feats, which is seen multiple times as he has been shown to be able to lift up / keep lifting up buildings that are collapsing on top of him. And while there are outliers to which Spider-Man has shown being able to destroy things that seem to be more on the level of continental or even cosmic levels, I would argue that those are more outliers to his actual strength, depending on what person is writing Spider-Man at that time. And that consistently, Peter Parker and to an extent Miles Morales are only as destructive at large building level, which means that their attack potency is significantly lesser than Deku. But attack potency isn't everything. Let's talk about speed. And when it comes to speed, Typically, Miles is faster, being comparable to Peter, who is massively hypersonic plus, which means that he can fight with individuals like Electro, who is either composed of electricity or can keep up with characters like Thor, if not for a short period of time. This is typically faster than Deku, who is at best supersonic with hypersonic plus reactions and combat speed. However, that is before Deku is able to use his additional quirks such as Fa Jin, but more importantly, Gear Shift. Because Gear Shift allows for Deku to reach points that allows him to be more relativistic plus, which means that he's able to approach around 50% the speed of light. And this is shown to be the case as Deku has multiple times shown to surprise Tomo Shigaraki, who is shown to be able to both catch and or reflect light lasers and is comparable to Star and Stripe, who has actually done the same. So it may seem that Miles Morales has the speed advantage, but I would actually give the speed advantage to Deku, and trust me, that is not going to be an outlier when it comes to Deku getting the win over Miles. Now, let's go into something a little bit more similar, which is lifting, which, once again, this goes to Deku, because while Spider-Man is said to be class 25, which basically means he can throw a car and pick up a truck, Deku has shown to be able to carry a bus, assumingly full of people on his own using Black Whip at only 30% power. Even at their highest estimate, Miles is class M, meaning that he's able to lift the size of a large ship, which ironically enough is something that we've seen capable of a character in Vigilantes, but that character is shown to be still weaker than All Might, which we're going to see later on in Vigilantes for it to be the case. But even then, if we compare it to just the main series, Deku has shown to have the ability to casually lift steel beams, as well as he's being comparable to Gentle Criminal in his lover mode, who is capable of keeping UA afloat using his quirk. And UA is quite literally not just the size of a building, but a small town. And just to add more emphasis to it, Versus Battle says that Deku just using 100% puts him at class P, aka small moon to astro level when it comes to lifting ability. And that is most likely the case because using his Black Whip, he's able to just lift up chunks of the earth with ease. And I'm going to be honest, with just those three categories, you can tell where the rest of this is going. Deku has greater striking strength, putting him at multi-city block level up to multi-continental level versus small building level when it comes to Miles Morales. At best, likely large building level at best. Durability, large town level to multi-continental levels of durability for Deku, with Miles, small building level up to large building level. Standard melee range, up close. He can also do more long range from hundreds of meters to tens of kilometers. With Miles, just a couple of tens of meters, if not a little bit of close-up combat. Even when it comes to intelligence relative to their world, Deku is a genius when it comes to his knowledge of quirks, while Miles is more or less just above average when it comes to the worlds that they live in. So when it comes to all of these stats, Deku pretty much is better in all of them except maybe stamina, where they are both similar and superhuman. But even then, if you compare it to instances of Spider-Man being able to fight on days on end straight without rest, Deku has done that for quite literally a month. So arguably, you could give stamina to Deku as well. So yeah, this is what I mean by potentially this fight being a stomp, with the interpretation that Deku's stats completely outclasses Miles in almost every category. However, Miles isn't out of it yet, and this is where we're going to get less from their stats and go more into their skills and weapons, where Miles could potentially even the battlefield with all of the weaponry that he has. And when it comes to skills, Miles has plenty of them, but so does Deku. And because both characters have a connection to Spider-Man Peter Parker, they also have a lot of shared powers, like superhuman abilities like super strength, speed, agility, durability, etc. They both have enhanced senses, spider sense for Miles and danger sense for Deku. However, Spider Sense gives Miles more defined precognition than Danger Sense, which is going to be beneficial due to the fact that while both Spider Sense and Danger Sense can be manipulated, Spider Sense has a lot more versatility than Danger Sense in many instances. And when it even comes to their ability to manipulate energy and elemental manipulation, Deku has Black Whip and Fajin, which is the manipulation of black energy tendrils and the manipulation of kinetic energy, as well as Deku having the manipulation of air to an extent, using his mid-gauntlets and his gloves to shoot out air and create tornadoes with his fist. But Miles Morales can also manipulate electricity, as well as be able to emit venom blasts, and even has shown the capability of creating his electricity to form shapes, such as a sword. But even though they do have similarities between them, they still have skills that set them apart, such as Miles Morales having invisibility, as well as Miles having a regeneration factor, which allows him to regenerate from energies a lot faster than a normal human. And he technically does have a level of immortality via his powers deriving from the Oz formula in his DNA. And, because he has the abilities of a spider, it also means that he can walk on walls, disappear but can't fly, and he's actually not that much more unique than the other guy. But the other guy, in this case, being Deku, who is also not lacking in unique powers as well. Because Deku can manipulate his powers a little bit better than Miles, as well as manipulate physics and has soul manipulation via Gear Shift and One for All. And while Deku can't walk on walls or disappear, he certainly can fly using float, as well as his mid-gauntlets to propel himself in different directions with the flick of a finger. And even better, Deku can create a smoke screen as well that can be very helpful when it comes to distracting his enemies, as well as him being able to manipulate his muscles using Black Whip. But even with that, Miles and Deku also has some shared resistances, but also resistances that are uniquely their own. For instance, they have relative resistances to particular elemental attacks, like electricity, and even to a lesser extent, fear. However, Miles seems to have more direct resistances, such as resistance to poison and acid, while Deku has resistances more indirectly via All for One, which allows him to not have his soul manipulated, as well as throughout the series being shown that through his strength alone, he can be resistant to both heat and cold, and not as resistant to poison due to him wearing a mask. And speaking of Deku's mask, let's talk about more about the equipment that each character has. And when it comes to the weapons each character has, they really don't carry around a lot of different weapons with them. Typically, Miles usually has on him his web shooters, as well as potentially extra web cartridges that may be specialized for certain situations. However, his web fluids can be very versatile because he's able to mold them and shape them in different ways to either restrain enemies, pull enemies in closer for more hand-on attacks, or even prevent enemies from leaving his vicinity using his webs. And we've seen that throughout Spider-Man's history, he's been able to mold the webs in different shapes to help in any situation that he's in, as well as having different web shooters for different situations, such as web shooters that are more concussive or web shooters that may be a little bit more resistant to electricity. But it does not mean that Deku lacks versatility with his weapons as well, which is derived mostly from his quirks. And outside of One for All, Deku has 6 additional quirks, which are Black Whip, Smokescreen, Float, Fajin, Gear Shift, and Danger Sense. And when it comes to versatility, he's able to combine and mix match these quirks in many different ways, such as using Fajin and Black Whip to enhance his restraining abilities, or combining Black Whip with Fajin inside of his body to allow for his bodies to move, or just using small parts of his body to actually use the quirks, such as using Fajin in his fingers to strengthen his attacks in his fingers. As well as Deku has his Iron Soul shoes, which helps mitigate the backlash of using One for All on his feet while giving it a little bit extra oomph, as well as his mid-gauntlet that's able to go over his entire arm, which actually allows him to use One for All at 100% without completely destroying his bones. And while I do know that Miles has recently gotten, relatively speaking, a vibranium suit, which would more or less add to his durability and make it hard for Deku to actually burst through it, due to the fact that this vibranium suit is not like normal vibranium in both the comics and the movies, because it's being made for a suit, which means it's not going to be as durable as, let's say, a Black Panther suit. I can't say definitively whether or not Deku would or wouldn't be able to break it, or if the suit is going to be even used in the death battle at all. But since we talked about One for All and talked about whether or not there will be issues with the suits, let's talk about the potential drawbacks that each character will have. And most of the drawbacks are going to be on Deku, because with Miles, at first, his drawbacks and weaknesses were that he was very unskilled, he was very young, very inexperienced, and lacked combat training. However, that has changed as Miles Morales goes from just a young teenager to a young adult. While the flaws with Deku using One for All are still relative to when he had the quirk. Because once again, if he overuses it too much and breaks his armor, he has and still retains the capability of destroying his body, which is going to be the inherent weakness of One for All inside of Deku. And even more is the detrimental of using his quirks, such as Gear Shift, which if used too much can cause his body to wear out and lose breath, which will make it harder for him to breathe and harder for him to fight. And that could be very detrimental in a battle to the death. And yeah, that's pretty much all of the major information that I think that we have and we need to cover to really determine who would win in a death battle between Deku and Miles. And do you think that the answer is very clear? Because I sure do. Because with all of this in mind, who do I think is actually going to win? I think it's most likely Deku. Don't get me wrong, Miles is very strong, and there may be some feats of strength, speed, and etc. that I may have missed thanks to my inexperience with Miles in the more comic format. However, from the minimal research that I've done about him and Deku, I don't think that Miles has as strong of a chance of defeating Deku as Deku has of defeating Miles. Because besides the fact that Deku outclasses him in almost every stat, because even when it comes to the weapons and skills, Deku still very much has an advantage, even though it's still going to be a close race. Because many of the skills that Miles has can actually be countered by Deku. Invisibility, Deku can dodge attacks that he can't see using Danger Sense. Electric attacks that could paralyze Deku, Deku has the ability to resist those electric attacks, as well as he can move his own muscles using Black Whip. Regeneration, Deku has fought against Tomura Shigaraki, who has hyper regeneration, better regeneration, and regeneration on par with characters such as Deadpool and Wolverine, and has been able to fight them on par and almost kill Tomura on multiple occasions, and fails on doing so using One for All physically because he was trying to save him. And the fact that he can go up against hyper regeneration like Tomura means that he can definitely overpower the regeneration of Miles Morales. And even then, Deku has some skills and unique abilities that Miles may not actually be able to overcome, because Deku has Black Whip that can restrain Tomura, who is stronger than Miles. Deku also has greater mobility in the sky that Miles can't really overcome. Deku has so many abilities that he can mix and match with at varying distances that Miles really cannot easily overcome that. So, while the fight seems very close on the surface, Deku, based off my own personal research, outclasses Miles, but not by much. And that Deku may actually be a better Spider-Man than Spider-Man himself. But yeah, that's the conclusion that I came to. I could be wrong on this, but based off how I did my research and understanding how the characters fight based off the format of Death Battle, I do think that very much Deku is going to win, and it's not just my own bias for My Hero Academia. But yeah, that's my own personal thoughts and opinions on the Death Battle matchup. And let me ask you this, do you think that Deku actually has a chance of defeating Miles, or do you think that Miles is going to crush Deku into paste? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz. Hopefully, I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!